With just a simple, free app download, you can turn your computer into a Nintendo Switch and play all the games from your backup files. Let me show you how. Hi and welcome to Bytes and Bits. The Nintendo Switch has been around since 2017 and is still Nintendo's flagship console, with the latest version 2 being released in mid-2025. Now, over this time, it's amassed an extensive library of great games, combining traditional console gameplay with some of the motion sensing features of the Wii and Wii U. Now, usually we're able to modify these older consoles to get access to the full games catalogue. But whilst this is possible on some of the earlier consoles, Nintendo quickly modified their design to patch that exploit, so later models can't actually be hacked. But luckily, the Switch has got some great emulators that let you use your legally obtained game backup files to run them directly on your PC, Mac, or even your Android devices. Now, if you've been watching the emulation scene, you'll know that the main Switch emulator, Yuzu, was taken down by Nintendo in 2024. But, being an open source project, the code had already been freely distributed and has since spawned a number of new emulators. So in today's video, I'll show you how to set up one of these emulators from scratch, with all the required files, how to set up your controllers, and how you can then start playing Nintendo Switch games right now. So, let's get started. The emulator we're going to be using for this project then is called Eden, and this is actually a fork of the Yuzu emulator. So the Yuzu emulator was one that Nintendo forced to be taken down a while back, as it was sort of, I think they pressed it a bit too hard on just what they were doing with the Switch. And of course the Switch is a current console, so you do need to be a bit careful about what you do with that. But anyway, the actual code base then, of course, was still hanging around. So there have been a number of forks. And a fork is basically a development of the software. So they take the original software and they sort of use that as the base for the new one. So that's where Eden has come from. Now, if you head across to the main website for this at eden-amu.dev, you'll come to this page here. And again, it has lots of information about the actual project. One of the important bits here is this thing called the compatibility. So these emulators, not every single game is going to work perfectly on the emulator. So this compatibility list here shows you which games have been checked out. Now, if you find the game you want to play listed in here, then great, you'll get an idea whether it will work or not. If it's not listed in here, well then really you're going to have to test it out just to see if it works or not. So most games will work or partially work. And again, you've got this information list here anyway, but do check them out yourselves. So there are some documentations, of course, here to show you how to set this all up, but I'm going to take you through that. So really all we want to do here is to go to the download page. And again, you can see it is available for pretty much anything you want to run it on. So we're of course going to be working with Windows today, but obviously Mac OS and Linux are there, and there is a version as well for Android. So if you want to get this up and running on one of your mobile devices, then you can too. So we're going to head across here to the Windows download, and this will take us out to the GitHub repository for the actual project. And again in here, so the download link will take us to the releases page, and you can see here that when I'm downloading this then in November 2025, we're at release candidate version 0.0.4. So again, it is very new, this one, but it is a really good one actually, and it is quite stable. And of course, it's built upon Yuzu, which was stable at the beginning anyway. So really we need to just sort of scroll down here. It does talk you through a lot of information about what's been happening with the new version. And of course, because this is under constant development at the moment, there's quite a lot of information there. But if we come down to the actual build section, you'll see that we find builds for various platforms. So again, it's a matter of finding the one that matches in with what you have. So I'm going to come down to the Windows package here. And again, you can see that we have, for Windows then, we have our general AMD or Intel CPU version, the AMD 64 version. And of course, we have then one for sort of our ARM processors. So I'm going to download that, and that will come down then as a zip file. So I just need to save it into a folder. So I'm creating a Nintendo Switch folder here, and I'm just going to save it in there. Now that we've got that file downloaded, you can see here we have our zip file sitting here. I just simply need to extract that. So if I just come in here and I say extract all, I'm just going to extract it into a folder. So I'm not going to use that full folder name. I'm just going to call it a folder called Eden, and I'm going to extract that. So that gives me a folder now which has all of my emulator files in it. So if I come back out here, the downloaded zip file that we have, we no longer need that. So we can just delete that to keep our system clean. Now the emulator itself, there isn't any further installation required for this. The executable file you'll find inside that folder, this eden.exe, that is the emulator itself. So that will just run from here. But what it does do, it will be creating quite a lot of data to get the whole system and the emulation set up. And it will put that into your sort of main user account local folder. But I prefer to actually get it to keep everything stored inside this folder, so it doesn't sort of mess around with those sort of main sort of central data areas. And we can do that by just simply in our main Eden folder here, so where I have my emulator executable file, if I create a new folder and I just call that user, if it finds this folder in the main folder with the emulator, it will actually save all of its data in there, and that really keeps everything all together for ourselves. So that's the emulator files all handled. Now you might have seen in my folders here, I have two other items. So one is a keys folder and one is a firmware folder or firmware zip file. Now these are files which are the, I suppose, the Nintendo copyrighted software on your console. So the first one here is what's known as a decryption key. So that is tied to the actual console itself. Now, if you do have a Switch, there is a way of downloading these files directly from your Switch console, but obviously that's quite a sort of torturous route. These files then, of course, there are versions of them available online, so simply use Google, of course, to go and have a look and see if you can find them. They're not that hard to find. And again, archive.org is probably an area where you can probably get some help finding them. But the one we actually really need is this prod.keys file. You will also find title.keys and probably dev.keys, but it's the prod.keys one that we're going to need for this project. Now we do also need the actual firmware from the console. So again, that's another file which you'll have to have a look around and try and find. Generally when you get that, of course, it will come down as a zip file. So again, I'm going to need to extract that, and I'm going to extract that then into a folder. And of course, once I've got that, I can delete my zip file. So I now have my emulator. I have my firmware with all of the console's firmware in there, and I have my decryption keys, and it's the prod.keys one that I want. So we actually have everything now to run our console. The only thing we need now are some games, and again, these are things you're going to have to find yourself. So let me put a few game files in a folder here, and then we'll come back and get everything up and running. So again, with the game files, you'll need to do a bit of searching around to find them. And what you're looking for are .nsp and .xci files. So both of those are different formats of saving Nintendo Switch games, and both will work with pretty much all of the different emulators that you find for it. And again, with this Eden emulator, those are the two that we're after. So if I come back to my main directory here, so we now have everything we need to get things up and running. So if I come into my Eden folder, and if I just double click on the eden.exe file, you might get a little window popping up saying that Windows doesn't recognize this application. So again, all we need to do here is we just need to simply click on More Info, and we can then just run it anyway. So again, if you've made sure that you've downloaded this from the official repositories and so on, then of course this should be okay. This is really just saying that Windows hasn't got enough sort of user information because this is quite a new system. So let's just run that anyway. So that should start our emulator. But the first thing we find is that it is missing some keys and other files. So let's sort that out. So these are the files that should be downloaded, our key files, our decryption keys, and of course our firmware. So if we head up to our Tools menu, we can install our decryption keys. So if we click on that, it'll come up with a file explorer, and we just simply need to go and find where we put those keys. So I put them into my Nintendo Switch folder in the keys, and it is that prod.keys file that we want to use. So if I open that up, you'll see there that we now have our decryption key installed. So next we need to install our firmware. So again, back to our Tools, Install Firmware. We're going to install it from a folder. So again, if we come back out to our Nintendo Switch folder, that is where I have stored my firmware files, and I have extracted them from the zip file. If I go in there, we need to select this folder, and it will then install our firmware. So just let that run through. And what we're looking for down the bottom here is some information. So when that installs, we should find that it has recognized that firmware and installed it for us. So we have successfully installed firmware version 20.1.1, and we then should see that down in this little corner here. So that's our system now ready to start playing some games. So the way this works then, we can either come up to our file menu and load individual files and so on, or load individual games, or we can get we can tell Eden where we've stored our games. So again, you can see it says double click here to add a new folder. So if I double click on that, I can then come out to where I put my games. So if I come down here and I have my games. So again, my games are in this folder. So if I select that folder, you can see now that it has scanned that folder and has picked up my games. And again, it's telling me here what file type they are and so on. It also then does check the compatibility of my games. So it's saying that both my Mario Kart and my Breath of the Wild will play perfectly. Playable, again, means that it will play, but you might get a little bit of glitches now and again. And again, we'll see that in a second anyway. So once we've got that all in place, we should be able to just simply click on a game, and that should then start up for us. And there we have Mario Kart running. So we know that everything is set up and ready to go. And there we go. So let's just come out of that. So let's just come back to our emulation, and we're going to stop that. So we know that everything is all up and running and working. So with our game files, obviously there are various sort of DLCs and updates released. So if we have any of those, we can install them from here as well. So if I come up to my file menu, we have an install files to NAND option here. So I actually have a DLC for my Mario Kart. So I can just simply select that and open that, and that should then install that into my system. If we now look up at the Mario Kart listing, you can see that we have our DLC content installed. Now with any of these games, once you have DLCs or updates installed, if you right click on them and go to configure game, you are able then in the add-ons section here to specify which bits of add-ons you want enabled when you play your game. So in this way you can either turn the DLCs on or off and so on. Now you can also set up specific settings for graphics and so on for this particular game. But what we're going to do next is we're going to just come out of that and we're going to set up our overall settings. So if I go to File and or to Emulation, sorry, and Configure, we'll have this little window pop open. So this lets us do all of the overall settings for how our emulator runs. So again, you can see there's a number of sections up in here. So basically most of the settings will be at standard. But if we come into our graphics section, one thing you do need to make sure is that you are I tend to run the Vulkan core here. You can see, you can see that there are an OpenGL as well, but Vulkan tends to run pretty well with this emulator. Make sure it is, if you have got a dedicated graphics card, make sure that is selected and that you're not running from your internal graphics. Again, that will give you better performance. On here then, the rest of it, pretty much leave it as it is. Your resolution then, again, you can run the emulator at a higher resolution than the Switch itself can work with. And again, you do need to make sure that you have a powerful enough computer to do that. So I'm just going to leave mine at 1x, which will run at native Nintendo Switch resolution. On the Advanced tab then, there are a number of other things that you can play about with here. Now some people do say to turn on the asynchronous presentation and so on. I would honestly, I would leave things as they are until you get things up and running. Some of these options here can cause the system to crash. At least I found they have. So I would generally just make sure that you've got it set to the right graphics card and the right resolution, and then just go from there. You can always tweak things later. Now, one of the things which you will need to have a look at, though, are your controls. Now, of course, you're going to need a controller plugged in to be able to play the games. So with the way it works here, Eden is able to emulate a number of different controllers that you might have plugged into your real Switch console. So the Pro Controller, the dual Joy-Cons, and so on. So I'm going to set mine up to emulate a Pro Controller, which is more of the sort of Xbox or PlayStation style controller rather than the Joy-Cons. And I have one of my GameSir controllers plugged in. So this is a little, it's designed for use with mobile phones and tablets and actually the Nintendo Switch. One of the good things about this one is that it can actually pretend to be a Nintendo Switch Pro controller, and that gives it all of the buttons and all of the motion sensors as well. So it is useful if you can find a controller that does allow you to emulate the motion control. So that would be something like this. You can actually use real Pro controllers and the Joy-Cons, and the PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 controllers do have the motion control built in as well. So those will work too. But once you've got one plugged in here, again, on the input device, this is where you select which of the controllers that you have plugged into your computer you want to connect. So again, here I'm working with player 1, I'm emulating a Pro controller, and the input device I physically have connected to my computer is this one here, which is actually my GameSir device. If the system recognizes what type of controller you're plugging in, it will set up all of this for you. So here it is mapping everything to the Pro Controller buttons. If I want to change anything at all, so say I wanted to remap the left on my D-pad, I would simply click on it and then press the button on my controller. So if it doesn't get everything correctly set up the way you want first, you can then remap it yourself. Once you have all this remap, then we can just click OK, and we should now be ready to play a game. So let's see if we can get that Mario Kart Deluxe up and running. So we just simply double click on it. So initially it will launch within this window. If I want to go full screen, I simply need to press on my F11 button, and that will take me out to full screen. So if all goes well, you should be able to get into your game. But what I find sometimes when we come to things like Mario Kart, where it relies on a Mii character being selected, if you've got the wrong product.key file, so remember whenever we loaded in those decryption keys, if your decryption key doesn't match the version of the firmware that you're using, you may find that you're not able to select any Mii characters or even create any new Mii characters. So if you do have that problem, then all you need to do is to make sure that you download a new prod.key file that matches your firmware, or at least is as close to your firmware as you can get. So I'm running version 21 of my firmware here. I've used a prod key from version 20, and that is working fine. So say if you do come across that problem, just go and have a look for a new prod key. But once you've got that going and you be able to select your Mii character, we should now be able to just simply boot up our game, and we're playing in our Nintendo Switch. So that's the Eden Switch emulator all set up and ready for your games. I did use a couple of bits in this project, so the game controller especially, you do need to have one that does have that, at least I would advise you have one that has that motion control. So as I said, I've been using that GameSir X5S little mobile controller, and that's really, really good for this, I think. Obviously then, as I say, PlayStation 3 and 4 and 5 controllers will work as well. Again, I'll put some links to those down in the description so you can go off and get hold of one. So hope you found this video useful. Please do click that like button and subscribe to the channel for more gaming, modding, emulation, making and electronics projects. I look forward to seeing you again very soon, and bye for now. For more games programming, electronics projects and retro gaming, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my website.